The final day of trade talks between Beijing and Washington on Friday was constructive, said U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said, just hours after the U.S. more than doubled tariffs on many Chinese products. However, President Donald Trump said he was in absolutely no rush to finalize a trade agreement with China. Mr. Trump said bilateral talks had continued in a very congenial way. The U.S. action took tariffs on affected Chinese goods to 25% from 10%. China said it would retaliate. It said it deeply regrets the move and would have to take necessary countermeasures. Only recently, the U.S. and China appeared to be close to ending months of trade tensions. Donald Trump tweets, "Talks with China continue in a very congenial manner. There is absolutely no need to rush, as tariffs are now being paid to the United States by China of 25% on $250 billion worth of goods and products. These massive payments go directly to the Treasury of the U.S. The U.S. has raised tariffs on $200 billion, £153.7 billion worth of Chinese imports, while Mr. Trump said a process had begun to place the full 25% tariff on a further $325 billion of Chinese goods. The $100 billion of tariffs taken in would be used to buy U.S. agricultural goods, which would then be used for humanitarian assistance," President Trump tweeted. Critics pointed out on Twitter that it is not China who will pay the taxes, but U.S. importers, and ultimately its consumers. China's Commerce Ministry confirmed the latest U.S. tariff increase on its website. It is hoped that the U.S. and the Chinese sides will work together to resolve existing problems through cooperation and consultation, it said in a statement. Chinese stock markets rose on Friday, with the Hang Seng Index up less than 1% and the Shanghai Composite more than 3% higher. However, earlier in the week stock markets had fallen after U.S. President Donald Trump flagged the tariff rise on Sunday. The U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of Chinese products, including fish, handbags, clothing and footwear, last year. The tariff was due to rise at the start of the year, but the increase was delayed as negotiations advanced. The U.S.-China trade war has weighed on the global economy over the past year and created uncertainty for businesses and consumers. Even though Mr. Trump has downplayed the impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy, the rise is likely to affect some American companies and consumers as firms may pass on some of the cost, analysts said. Deborah Elms, executive director at the Asian Trade Center, said, "It's going to be a big shock to the economy. Those are all U.S. companies who are suddenly facing a 25% increase in cost, and then you have to remember that the Chinese are going to retaliate." The American Chamber of Commerce in China said, "While we are disappointed that the stakes have been raised, we nevertheless support the ongoing effort by both sides to reach agreement on a strong, enforceable deal that resolves the fundamental, structural issues our members have long faced in China." French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire warned that the trade dispute escalation threatened jobs across Europe. "There is no greater threat to world growth," Mr. Le Maire told C News. BBC economics correspondent Andrew Walker said the direct impact of the trade dispute would be on the US and China. He said there was economic research suggesting that US tariffs hit American consumers, not Chinese exporters, as President Trump argues. There could also be wider implications, he added. Any softening of demand among Chinese and American consumers and businesses is likely to affect their suppliers. To take some possible examples, China is a key market for metals and energy exporters and for suppliers of industrial machinery such as Germany. The US is a key buyer of consumer goods, our correspondent said. These two markets won't dry up, but they could be a little weaker as a result of any economic hit from the tariffs. Mr. Trump's tariff increases have taken many businesses in China and America by surprise, fueling their anxieties about investment and supply chain viability. Chinese exporters say passing on costs to their U.S. customers may be the only way to compensate for dwindling profit margins. The U.S. importers will have to absorb it and transfer it on to consumers, Herbert Lun, a Chinese haircare electronics maker, told the Financial Times. America's farmers are suffering too. Shipments of soybeans, one of the most valuable U.S. agricultural export crops, to China have slumped. A combination of higher tariffs and depressed farm commodity prices are putting U.S. farmers under increasing pressure, economists say. Davy Stevens, a West Kentucky farmer and president of the American Soybean Association, told local media that farmers are in a desperate situation. Despite this week's escalation in tensions, talks were held between Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on Thursday. A White House spokesman said U.S. officials had agreed with the vice premier to resume talks on Friday morning, according to media reports. Even though there had been growing optimism about progress in trade talks recently, sticking points have persisted throughout. These have included issues around intellectual property protection, how fast to roll back tariffs and how to enforce a deal. Analysts say the Chinese are still willing to negotiate to retain the moral high ground and because they recognize the importance of solving the trade war. A trade war will be bad for China, both the real economy and the financial markets. It will also be bad for the world economy, said Gary Hubauer of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Better for China to play the role of conciliatory statesman than angry retaliator. China has been a frequent target of Donald Trump's anger, with the U.S. president criticizing trade imbalances between the two countries and Chinese intellectual property rules, which he says hobble U.S. companies. Some in China see the trade war as part of an attempt by the U.S. to curb its rise, with Western governments increasingly nervous about China's growing influence in the world. Both sides have already imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of one another's goods. The situation could become worse still, as Mr. Trump has also warned he could shortly introduce 25% duties on $325 billion of Chinese goods. What exactly sparked the U.S. president's latest actions, which apparently took China by surprise, is unclear. Ahead of the discussions, Mr. Trump told a rally China broke the deal and would pay for it. The International Monetary Fund said the row posed a threat to the global economy. As we have said before, everybody loses in a protracted trade conflict, the body which aims to ensure global financial stability said in a statement, calling for a speedy resolution. News script taken from BBC. Thanks for watching.